Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to introduce you to two good friends of mine who I've known now for over 3 years, Joe Parker and Matt Williams from the University of Florida. Well, I wonder if you might tell us a little bit about yourselves before we get started on talking about flipped advising.
Sure thing. George, I've been in advising for about 6 years now, and worked particularly with engineering students in a freshman program where all of our freshman engineers come through our office, and I partnered with our team, and Matt was our assistant director there. And we have over 1,800 students that we see, and at the time when we started working with flipped advising, I think we only had 5 advisors, so you can tell that the ratio is pretty big. So
That's
a little bit
great.
about me. Also, back in the day, I was an artist, so that's kind of fun.
That's excellent. A creative juice is necessary for doing flipped advising.
Yeah.
Matt, you've just moved.
That's right. Yeah, I'm now living in Indiana. I am still working with the University of Florida through the UF Online program advising computer science students. But prior to that, I spent the last 10 years with the first year advising program, where we're able to implement a flipped advising program there, which was very successful and something we're very proud of.
So George, when we started out, we had 1,800 students coming in that we were working with 5 advisors. Because we are an engineering accredited program, part of that accreditation requires us to meet with and have mandatory advising for each student. So we were wondering, how can we actually have meaningful conversations with our students with that many students coming in? And one of the things we thought of was, what if we actually flip the script here and ask the students to do some of the preparation beforehand so that they're a little bit ready. So in the beginnings, when we started flipped advising, and this was in 2016 is when we really got our first go at it, we were just having students submit a plan to our learning management system. It was a 5-semester plan so that we could be a little bit prepared, and so the students could have said, hey, I actually looked at what I'm going to be studying. Engineering is a really lockstep major at the University of Florida. UF's a great place because you can choose any major at the campus. You don't apply to, engineering or arts. You apply to the University of Florida. So students oftentimes choose engineering thinking, I know exactly what engineers do. And then they realize that their education is very prescribed for them. And one of the things that we noticed when we were having conversations with our students was that most of them were not really aware what an engineer actually did and what the requirements were going to be for them to be successful. And in a broader sense, a lot of our students didn't actually realize why they were in college in the first place. And they couldn't tell you that. So as we started kind of going through the whole flipped advising program, we decided we not only needed the student to do a plan, but we needed the students to actually start reflecting on why they were in college and investigating their own career paths and personal goals so that they could really come up with a well-rounded education. And we could be there to have the meaningful conversations to help them self-actualize. And that ultimately was our goal, to promote self-authorship for our students.
Great, interesting. Could you perhaps show us some of the activities you had your students do?
Well, folks, I want to share with you what we've been doing here with our program. We actually decided to use our advising philosophy, one of our mantras in the office, that we are to educate, empower, and encourage, as a way to think about developing a year-long, zero-credit Canvas course in which the students are welcomed in and then asked to participate in a number of activities. The education portion is our first part of our module, and you're welcomed into the first year advising page. As you can see here, we have an engineering orientation phase, And this is just basically informational. There's a start here location, a place to go and meet your academic advisors. We developed it in such a way that we have assignments, learning objectives, an overview, then module videos, which have been a lot of fun. We actually did a tour of Weil Hall, which is our advising office that we had some help with from the folks in our Center for Institutional Technology and Teaching. And it's just a really cool kind of setup.
We welcome you to Gator Engineering.
So we have some other information on here. And then as the students click through each one of these activities, we actually have quizzes that they are to take, and we can kind of preview that quiz really quickly, that ask specific questions about where you go to get information. You know, how do you set up appointments, and where is our office? Also, it gets into a little bit more depth here with some of the specific questions a little further on. So it was really helpful in helping us reach our learning objectives. Let's go back to the home page here. So that's the phase 1 modules, and that's really for when the students are coming in during the summer, right at the beginning of fall semester. Phase 2 is our academic planning module. And we have 2 parts to this. This is a getting involved on campus, and then creating your academic plan. The getting involved has a basic survey along with some more videos to help people understand maybe the differences between what it was like being a freshman in high school and then what it's like being a freshman in college. We have a survey here that the students are to take that asks them some basic questions about their involvement. Also a kind of open-ended reflection question. As I mentioned earlier, we really wanted our students to start taking charge of their own education and telling us why they are studying things. So that's part 2, phase 2. We also have them build a 5-semester plan that they can submit. During building this 5-semester plan, we have all of the information here for their academic policies, degree requirements. So there's some things they can do to review their degree audit. All this is set up for them right there. And so that's really what they're going to have completed before they come in and are able to set up an advising appointment to meet with their advisor. Once they do, we'll have reviewed that information and their academic plan, and we're ready to have a really great conversation with them. The last thing we have is the moving forward phase. And we designed this to be the spring semester where the student is really needing to be encouraged to go out there and to take charge of getting involved a little bit more, but also do some reflecting on how their first year has gone and is it lining up with their expectations. So we have some really great, we actually had the president of the university, Dr. Fox, talk and do a little interview that's fabulous. He was an engineer at one time before moving into higher education, and he talks to our students about that. So I'll just play that for just a short second. And we had one of our peer advisors do this.
Today I have the privilege of speaking with our awesome UF president. Hi, President Fox.
Hi, Elsie. It's good to see you. I'm so glad that you dropped by Tiger Hall. Thanks for being here.
So that was a really awesome opportunity because students got to see that even the president of the university might have changed his major and had a different alignment of what his goals were. So that's really the overview of our program. I'd love to show you guys more. If anybody ever has any questions about that, it'd be great. We can help you out and share some of this content with you.
That's wonderful, Joe. I was wondering if you could just comment a little bit about how well did your students embrace the flipped advising approach?
So we have had almost, I think in our first semester, and Matt will need to comment on this because he's got the numbers, it was well over 90% of students participating. I would even say it was high 90s, mainly because a lot of the students who needed to come in and do their advising appointment wanted to actually be prepared. So there's a lot of enthusiasm here. And, you know, when we mentioned this during our summer preview, which is where our students come and register for their courses, students get excited about being assigned this class. You know, it's a great way for them to get new information. Some of that excitement, of course, wanes over the semester, but a lot of students we have found really enjoy doing the reflections. And maybe Matt can tell some really good stories about that in the future when you're talking to him.
Absolutely, that'd be great. So to set the stage, you mentioned that it's part of a course, but you also use the modules independent of the course, don't you?
We do. So each module can be reused each semester. The course isn't graded, so we could have a student who could have declared their major in spring, because you have the possibility to do that as a University of Florida student. And we could have them run through specific modules to follow up on things. Or one of the really great aspects of this is we can have them go ahead and upload a 5-semester plan, even if they're starting in the spring, and then they can have that plan with them as they transition to the next year. So it's a really great tool.
That's great. What were some of the challenges you met while trying to build this program?
Well, there were a lot, but we got rescued. And I want to really promote to all the different campuses we have out here and folks paying attention to these videos. Look at the different resources you have on your campus. We started our program and it was a bare bones site, you know, just a basic setup with an assignment that the students had and maybe some announcements. Then the Center for Institutional Technology and Teaching contacted us and said, hey, we'd love to get on the forefront of this, as we see it as something the whole university is going to do. And so they helped us with the visuals and things like that. And also, one of the big things was, how do you get those learning objectives that you want put into actual assignments? And so they were able to help us walk through that by doing some course mapping and really helping us connect the assignments to big ideas we wanted students to get. Sometimes that's a little challenging, but one of the best things anybody can do is just reach out to other people and ask about it.
That's great. I think that's great advice to give people who want to pursue this approach and incorporate it into their advising. Do you have any words of recommendation that, besides seeking help, that embracing this approach?
Well, you have to be very flexible. You know, 4 years ago when we were working with Canvas, not all the students understood the concept of having assignments due without a grade. And so we had to deal with that and walk students through the importance of doing some reflection, doing some self-evaluation. We also had some really big technical issues. Canvas doesn't allow you to have more than 1,000 answers to a survey. So we actually had times where we couldn't load some of the survey answers that the submitted. We've also had some like technical issues with PDFs being blank when students upload them because they didn't understand that you were supposed to download it and save it when they were working on their 5-semester plan. So in each of these cases, one of the things that you really have to really think through and be adept at is meeting the student where they are. You know, the Canvas course is a great tool, but it doesn't replace advising. And that's really the most important thing I can say here, is that when you're interacting with the students, it's great to have this information beforehand, some of the reflections. You get to find out some great stories. Like I said, Matt's going to tell you a couple in a minute. But if you're not flexible, it's really going to be difficult, because students are going to come in and say, you know, this didn't upload, I'm really nervous about it. And you want to meet them where they're at.
That's great. I really appreciate those suggestions here for people who want to pursue this. So at this point, what I want to do is bring Matt into a conversation. and ask him first a little bit more about some of the challenges he encountered and thinks about from his perspective, and we'll go forward from there. But in the meantime, Joe, we'll be in touch. Thank you so much for sharing.
All right, for sure, George.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Joe, for explaining to us some of the challenges that both you and Matt faced. I'll go ask Matt some of the challenges from his perspective that you faced in putting together this voluntary course.
Hi, George. Yeah, so there were quite a few when we first started doing this. We really didn't go with the simplest answer. And I mean that we went searching for some kind of technological solution on campus. We tried to implement it. I think it was Microsoft SharePoint, which it was a fine program, but not for our purposes. So we were really trying to shoehorn a piece of technology in there, or what we wanted into that piece of technology, without really looking into it. So after the first semester, we realized, hey, this isn't working. And then we realized, well, why not use Canvas? It's right there. All of our students use it. And so that was one challenge we had to overcome was, hey, just use what we have, and start getting something out there. You know, my big advice, I think, to people who are worried about getting started, and I think when we've talked about this at NACADA, the question always comes up, we're just afraid to get started. You know, how do we get started on this? And my advice is just to get something out there. We worked with our Office of Institutional Technology. They made the site look pretty, but it doesn't have to look pretty to be effective. We had an effective site, a site that students took advantage of long before it was pretty, and they got the same results. So I think for those people, I would say really just get started with something, get a plan out there, get some questions out there for students, whatever you're gearing your program to do, whatever results you want, just start getting something out there.
That's wonderful. Well, as we were talking earlier too, you also mentioned that this was a voluntary course, not a university level course. So could you describe that type of framework a little bit so that people have a better understanding of what we mean by course, because that could be so misinterpreted?
That's right. Our office calls it a course, and that's how we kind of bill it to our first year students coming in, but it's really not a course in the traditional sense. It's not going to show up in the schedule of courses. It's not going to show up on the students' list of registered courses. But what we do is we create Canvas modules. And so all of our incoming students we assign to these modules. Our office has assigned advisors, so they go into that advisor section of Canvas, and that's how we do it. So no, it's not a traditional university course, even though we call it a course because I think we want it to sound official, even though it's really at the end of the day kind of a voluntary thing on the part of the student.
That's interesting. How do you get students in to participate?
Well, the first thing is just communication. Right as soon as summer orientation starts, we're talking about it. We're talking about it in emails. We're talking about it at the actual orientation sessions. We have a due date. And the nice thing about getting the students used to this, going onto Canvas and doing these modules while they're first years, is they haven't quite figured out they don't have to do it yet. So when we give them a due date, they're more likely to go out there and at least look at it. Most of them do participate in it and complete the modules.
Interesting. As far as the use of the modules and other things, what have you found to be some of the most valuable type of activities when you work with students using the course?
Yeah, there's two different types we've used. One is just information gathering. You know, what's your major? Are you considering a double major? Have you been going to Career Showcase? You know, do you plan to? Just general information gathering like that. And then we do, in the spring semester, we tend to do a lot of reflection. And that's for the student to sit there and reflect about their experience in college up to that point, about if they're in the right major. Some of the questions we've asked have ranged from, you know, tell us about your ideal day. You know, what does it look like? How much are you studying? Are you having fun? I hope they're having fun. To things like what gives them a greater sense of investment and ownership of the major they're in. You know, we want them to think about those kind of things. A lot of times, you know, we typically have about 10 questions on the reflection piece. But so I will, in our office, we see about 15 students a day by appointment. I will go through in the morning and look over, kind of review everyone's responses that are on my calendar that day. But a lot of time, those questions, even though they're for the student, they give us more to talk about in the advising appointment. Because a student might mention something, like for once, one time I had a student who talked about playing banjo. And that was interesting to me. I'm interested in Appalachian music, and I enjoy that. So I got to talking with the student about the banjo. And that led to more of a long-term, I think, relationship for me and that student. He kept coming back to see me. I think it was something we connected with. So we're able to use that information to kind of make some of those connections. Other times, you know, it really helps the student. You really get a sense of what the student wants when they're doing the reflection questions, and we can better help point them in toward research, or maybe there's a certain professor they need to be talking to. We can do things like that. I'll give you one more example. Every once in a while, you kind of get some red flags from these things too. One time we had a student who had mentioned being sent away from home, and he put home in quotation marks, and having to come to college. And so when I read this, we knew that this isn't going to be a normal advising session, right? This is an issue that needed to be addressed. Choosing his classes for next semester wasn't the most important thing at this point. It was about his sense of involvement and belonging, and maybe we need to get him pointed to some other resources.
That's a great example of that, and being able to intervene then because you have that information, and something that possibly would not have come out if it were within just an advising session where you're meeting them face to face. That's interesting. From your personal level, it's clear that you and Joel have been able to have more in-depth types of conversations with your students as well as all people on your team. How do you end up by selling this though to other people on your campuses, particularly administrators at different levels, in order to say, okay, why aren't you just bringing the students in and addressing their needs, and then, you know, helping them out, and then, you know, more of a traditional type of an approach?
I think from our qualitative analysis, we've seen that students do actually really enjoy this. They tell us in surveys that they're getting a lot out of the program. We've had some students say they wish there was more of it because it did help them to think about what they were doing and their major and just how they're going about their time in college in general. So, you know, that kind of qualitative evidence from students, I think, is important. But also, when we look at our probation numbers, we've seen a significant, drastic, really, decrease in the number of first-year students on probation. Before we implemented the flipped advising approach, the number of first-year students in our program that were on what we call tracking probation and academic probation was about 25%. The year after we implemented it, it dropped to 15%. And we've had drops since then. We're down to now between 10 and 11% of students, first-year students on probation. So we've had this massive decrease in that number. And so we tell that to every administrator we can to show that this is an effective approach.
And do they end up by asking you, well, that sounds nice, but can you attribute that to flipped advising, or are there other factors involved?
They have, and you know, we do explain that this is giving us more quality time with the student. You know, when you have a large caseload like we do, and our office has fluctuated over the years, but we've had semesters where we've been at a 500-to-1 ratio. This really improves the flipped advising, improves the quality of the advising session, because you do have a little bit more information about the student. In our office, we ask the student to do a plan before they come in. So we can review that very quickly and then talk to the student about other things like, hey, are you sure this is the major for you? If so, that's great. You know, are you thinking about research? Are you thinking about internships,
Right.
clubs? We have more time to get into these other topics. And I think that when administrators ask that question, that's kind of what we point them to, is that this approach really frees the advisor up to have a more meaningful, impactful advising session with a student.
That's interesting. I'm glad to hear that. What about students who end up by their perception of you as an advisor? Do you feel that there's a point where the student begins to realize that you are expecting them to do the work, but you're there to help assist and aid them to achieve their goals, clarify their goals, and move forward? Is there an expectation? Because so many times, as we know, students expect advisors to be really more customer service type of oriented approach. I have a problem, you solve it. And so you're really changing the loci of control here.
Yeah, I had a student last year, we were discussing, she wasn't happy with her engineering major. And we had met, I don't know, countless times. And I asked her, I said, you know, what is it that you want to do? I know you've been thinking about this for a while, but what is something that you like to do? And she looked at me and said, well, I like what you do. And then I realized, hey, that's great. That's the first time a student's ever told me that. But I think it did speak to that we're having a more meaningful conversation, right? We're not just performing an administrative function, and the student can see that. The student knows that we know a little bit more about them, we care a little bit more about them, and are really invested in helping them to be successful in whatever it is they want to do.
So you're actually developing more of a developmental or mentoring type of relationship with the student rather than just going over information and policies and procedures.
That's exactly right.
And very good. Looking into the future, what do you see doing with this approach, University of Florida, College of Engineering? What would you like to see happen as you move forward?
We have changed, and we're careful to review our program every year. And I think every year of its existence, we've made some small changes to it, and I think that's important. One of the things we'd like to do for the future is make it a little bit more of an exploratory approach. Personally, I've always wanted to have students take things like the ONET, career interest inventory, and be able to discuss that with them. I know a lot of our first year students, they come in thinking, I'm going to do X. But as they get into the breadth of the university, they see there's so many more opportunities. And maybe what they thought they wanted to do really even resided in another field. Right. So I think kind of tweaking our modules more toward an exploratory focus is something we're looking to do. And of course, we're also always trying to expand for what you said earlier about proving proving this worth to administrators, but expanding our advising surveys and looking at our probation numbers and things like that.
And when you do the surveys, you do those within Canvas, correct?
We do.
You do. Okay, so you basically are using those tools there in order to reach out for your students. Do you find the data analytics within Canvas helpful when you end up by trying to do this program assessment?
It can be. I think when we have the number of students that we do, I think Canvas locks down at 1,000 students.
Okay.
And so that's been a little bit problematic. I'd say that's also one of the challenges we faced. But it's just, at the end of the day, it's just a little bit more work. It's not, but it is, the analytics are helpful, yes.
Okay, great. Oh, wonderful. For anyone going down this path, do you have any words of wisdom that you would suggest to them besides jumping into the pool?
Yeah. Besides jumping into the pool, and I do think that's the most important thing, is I think start with your goals in mind. I think we've talked about backwards by design, but have your goals in mind and then work backwards from there and ask yourself, how am I going to achieve? What do I want to know from my students, and how am I going to achieve it?
That's great great advice to anyone wanting to do this. Well, that's super. Well, Matt, I certainly appreciate you taking time, and you and Joel this afternoon, telling us about your success at the University of Florida College of Engineering using flipped advising.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
All
Anytime,
right.
George. Thank you.